these important hearings and for the great work that you and your staff have done in your constitutional responsibility of oversight. I'm grateful to Agent Brian Terry's family for being here today and wish to express my sympathy for their loss. I hope that we can get the Terry family the answers that they deserve. I also want to thank the brave people who are testifying from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, these federal agents. I know that they're here to tell the unvarnished truth. I also know that that can be very tough since they still work for the ATF. These agents already risk their lives to keep us safe. They shouldn't have to risk their jobs as well. And continuing to highlight what Congressman Cummins highlighted from my statement, any attempt to retaliate against them for their testimony today would be unfair, unwise, and unlawful. And let me add to what Congressman Cummins said, and it would be a personal affront to this senator. When I became ranking member of the Judiciary Committee in January, this was the first oversight issue to land on my desk. Several other senators' offices contacted my office to pass along these allegations about an ATF case called Operation Fast and Furious. At first, the allegations sounded too shocking to believe, but sadly, they turned out to be true. ATF is supposed to stop criminals from trafficking guns to Mexican drug cartels or I guess any place else. Instead, the ATF made it easier for alleged cartel middlemen to get weapons from U.S. gun dealers. Agents were actually ordered to stand by and watch these middlemen, these straw purchasers, buy hundreds upon hundreds of weapons. Agents warned that inaction could lead to tragedy, but management didn't want to listen. We will hear from some of those agents today and hear it from their point of view. Inaction would be bad enough, but ATF went even further. ATF encouraged gun dealers to sell to straw buyers. Emails prove that at least one dealer worried prophetically about that risk. He wrote to ATF about his concerns that a Border Patrol agent might end up facing the wrong end of one of those weapons. ATF supervisors told the dealer, "Don't worry." So, the agents said it was a bad idea, and the gun dealers said it was a bad idea. Who thought it was a good idea? Why did this happen? Congress deserves answers to these questions. The President said it didn't authorize it, that he didn't authorize it, and that the Attorney General didn't authorize it. They have both admitted that, quote unquote, a serious mistake may have been made. There are a lot of questions and a lot of investigating to do. But one thing has become clear already. This was no mistake. It was a conscious decision by senior officials. It was written down. It was briefed all the way up to Washington, D.C. According to an internal briefing paper, Operation Fast and Furious was intentionally designed to, quote, allow the transfer of firearms to continue to take place, end of quote. Why would the ATF do such a thing? Well, the next line in the brief paper tells us. It was, quote, to further the investigation and allow for the identification of additional co-conspirators, end of quote. So, very clearly, that was the goal. The purpose of allowing straw buyers to keep buying was to find out who else might be working with them, who else might be in their network of gun traffickers. Of course, that assumes that they're part of a big, sophisticated network. That kind of assumption can cause one to start with a conclusion and then work backward, looking for the facts that fit the case. Until you figure out that you got the cart before the horse, you're probably not going to get anywhere. Professor of criminology Gary Kleck recently published an article in the Wall Street Journal called, quote, "The Myth of Big-Time Gun Trafficking," end of quote. Professor Kleck said that, according to his study of national crime data, ATF handles only about 15 operations each year that involve more than 250 guns. According to his study, a typical trafficking operation involves fewer than 12 guns. So, why would the ATF make it a priority to identify large networks of traffickers? And again, why would senior leadership decide to explicitly elevate that goal above ATF's traditional work of seizing weapons that were illegally purchased? On October 26, 2009, emails indicate that there was a meeting of senior law enforcement officials at our Justice Department. It appears to have included the heads of every law enforcement component of the department, including directors of the FBI, the DEA, and the ATF. It also included the U.S. attorneys for all the southwest border states, the director of the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force, and the chairman of the Attorney General's Advisory Committee. Sounds like a pretty big, important meeting, doesn't it? On the agenda at the meeting was a document describing the department's strategy for combating Mexican cartels. In a section called, quote, "Attacking the Southbound Flow of Firearms," end of quote, it says, and I quote from the document, "Merely seizing firearms through interdiction will not stop firearms trafficking to Mexico. We must identify, investigate, and eliminate the sources of illegally trafficked firearms and the networks that transport them," end of quote. Well, the message in that document is pretty clear, isn't it? Trying to identify networks of traffickers is more important than seizing weapons. This document was transmitted to the head of the Phoenix Field Division on October the 27th, 2009. 4 days later, the Phoenix Field Division began investigating Uriel Patino on suspicion of being involved in a gun trafficking ring. 10 days after that, Patino was assigned his own case number. In the first 24 days that the ATF was on to him, Patino bought 34 guns from dealers cooperating with the ATF. That's nearly 3 times more than the typical gun trafficking operation, according to the study in the Wall Street Journal that I just mentioned. But that was just the beginning. Since the dealers were cooperating, ATF received notices of each purchase right away. Analysts enter the serial numbers into ATF's suspect gun database, usually within days of the purchase. On November the 20th, one of the 34 guns Patino bought turned up in Mexico just 14 days after he bought it in Phoenix. ATF learned of the recovery through a hit in a suspect gun database on November the 24th. That same day, Patino brought Jaime Avila into a cooperating gun dealer, and they bought 5 more guns. ATF had real-time notice from the dealer, and agents raced to the store to follow them. But they arrived too late. Over the next 6 weeks, Avila bought 13 guns at dealers cooperating with the ATF. The dealers notified the ATF of each purchase right away. Analysts entered the serial numbers in the ATF database, usually within about 2 days of purchase. Yet, ATF did nothing to deter or interrupt the straw purchasers. Avila went back to cooperating dealer and purchased 3 more AK-47 type weapons on January the 16th, 2010. ATF simply put the serial numbers in its database. Still, ATF did nothing to stop Avila and Patino. 11 months later, 2 of those 3 rifles were recovered at the scene of Agent Terry's murder. During those 11 months, Avila purchased another 34 arms, but Patino purchased 539. Again, cooperating gun dealers notified ATF of each and every purchase. It usually took about 5 days to enter the serial numbers into the ATF database. But ATF often had real-time or even advance notice of the purchases from the dealers. ATF even specifically approved of particular transactions. I'll give you an example. In August 2010, a gun dealer cooperating with the ATF asked for guidance. Patino wanted 20 more weapons, but the dealer only had 4 in stock. The dealer told ATF that if he were to sell the guns, he would have to, quote, obtain the additional 16 specifically for this purpose, end of quote. An ATF supervisor wrote back, quote, our guidance is that we would like you to go through with Mr. Patino's request and order additional firearms. At this point, ATF already knew that he had bought 673 guns from cooperating dealers and that many had already been recovered at crime scenes. I want to be clear that we don't know for sure whether this particular order was actually filled for these additional 16 guns. However, these new emails support what agents and dealers have been telling us for many months. According to them, dealers identified ATF when any of the straw purchasers bought guns, either before, during, or at least shortly after the sale. We don't know what the exact totals are, but we know that the suspect gun database had at least 1,880 guns related to this case. At least 30 of them were high-power 50 caliber rifles. The straw purchasers bought 212 guns in just 6 days, December 2009. 70% of all guns in the database were bought by just 5 straw purchasers. If ATF agents had been allowed to stop just those 5 buyers, most of the guns in this case would not have fallen into the wrong hands. Finally, I want to say something about the politics of gun control. This investigation is not about politics. It's about getting the facts. That's what constitutional responsibility of oversight is all about. That's our checks and balances of government. No matter what side of that issue you're on, the facts here should be disturbing. There will be plenty of time for both sides to argue about policy implications of all this at some point, but I hope that we can do that at another day. Today is all about these agents not being allowed to do their job. Today is about the Terry family and their search for the truth. Too often, we want to make everything about politics. We pick sides and only listen to what we want to hear. At least for today, let's just listen to these agents, and let's just listen to this family and hear what they have to say. Let's hear their stories and hear it loud and clearly. Let's then work together to get answers for this family and the other families who may have suffered. It's time to get to the truth and hold our government accountable. The public's business ought to be public. The public's right to know. And with the public's right to know comes that accountability. That's the checks and balances of our government, and that's what congressional oversight is all about. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.